Oh, hey, you're up. Oh, hey, you're up.
Hit that flying vagina or what?
Oh, hey, you're up.
You're
Oh,
gonna
hey,
die.
you're up.
Again
Hit that flying vagina or
again.
what?
Oh, hey,
and
you're
again.
up. Oh, hey, you're up.
Hit that flying vagina or what?
Oh, hey, you're up. Oh, hey, you're up.
Who's Bill Murray?
Oh, hey, you're up. I'm not sure if you remember my name or not. You were pretty wasted last night. I'm Bubbawheat, and you're listening to my podcast, It's Time to Rewind, where we're in the death days of autumn, covering the Happy Death Day movies one loop at a time. This week, I have something special for you. Joining me today is Scott Lobdell, who wrote the first Happy Death Day movie. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
I am doing good. I am excited to talk with you. I've been digging into the first movie, and I think it really holds up to, breaking it down piece by piece the way I've been doing, looking at one loop at a time. It's been interesting, and it's made me appreciate the movie, more than I had, even though I'm fairly new to the movie. But I'm really enjoying this project, and I'm looking
How
forward
many
to
times did you?
continue it.
How many times did you have to watch it to get all your
Um,
notes together?
well, I watched the entire movie. I watched the movie front to back just once over the summer, and then each loop, I kind of I don't watch it multiple times. I tend to kind of watch it like I watch a little bit, I'll take a note, and then I'll rewind a little bit, and I kind of jump back and forth. But I probably watch each loop the equivalent of maybe 2 or 3 times as I'm taking notes.
Uh, when you have a huge family like I do, I have 24 nieces and nephews, and so many people are like, "Oh, I want to watch the movie, but I want to watch it with you." And I'm like, "Okay." And I must have seen it like 18 times, and now I can't really watch it anymore. So,
So
uh,
I know that you kind of got your start as a comic book writer,
mhm.
and you've written a lot of X-Men comics, which I know that the X-Men timeline in general is very confusing, and there's a lot of time travel stuff. Had you written any kind of time travel or any time loop stories, before Happy Death Day?
Well, I wouldn't say it was time travel. It's a alternate reality, but the
Hmm.
probably the most famous alternate reality X-Men story was I wrote Age of Apocalypse, which was
Mhm.
this epic, we canceled all the books and started over, and we did 4 issues where the supposition was what would happen if Professor X had died and never got to form the X-Men. And so every single person who has ever been an X-Men since was impacted. So we saw this world where, good guys were bad guys and bad guys were good guys. And, people who were the leaders of one group were like the quiet, what do you want to do, boss, in the other group. And it's really, really fascinating. It was really fun. So, but time travel itself, I did, it's funny. I did a Xena versus Army of Darkness for Dynamite. And it
Mhm.
was really, if you look close, it was Happy Death Day. It was just doing Happy Death Day. And, it was like they were both trying to solve their individual problems, and they were both reliving the days from two different, and they were using what they learned from each other to solve this problem. So it's pretty fascinating. It's what I kind of had planned for Happy Death Day 2, but uh, they wanted to go in a different direction, so they did that. But you know, so
So
I
what
originally wrote it as a trilogy in my head, but
What was the inspiration for Happy Death Day? What inspired you to start writing that?
um, I at the time a lot of horror scripts were selling, and I was like, I want to do a horror script, but I want to do a horror script that hasn't been done before. And I thought, well, every time we see a horror movie, it's always the, bad girl who's having sex gets killed in the beginning, and the good girl lives to the end until she's, fighting the bad guy in her underwear. And I thought, well, how do I turn that around? How do I make the bad girl live to the end, and you know, uh, and there wouldn't even be a good girl because there would always essentially be that bad girl. And then I thought, well, the only way to do it is to, follow through with her death. And then I started to think, well, okay, what if each time she dies, she becomes a better person? And that's what made me think, okay, the way to do that is by using, there'd be two ways to do it. One way would be to using Groundhog's Day as the template of all, you know, people dying and coming back, or, in Bill's case, falling asleep and coming back. And there's also a movie called DOA from, I don't know, the 1940s, I think, where it opens up where a college professor is walking through the rain. It's a black and white movie, and he goes into the police station and he says, "I'd like to report a murder." And they're like, "Well, who got murdered?" And he's like, "I did." And you come to find out that he's been poisoned, and he has 24 hours to solve his own death. And I've always been fascinated by that concept. So I'm like, what if you take, I'm not Scream, Happy Death Day, and marry it to this concept of somebody who's trying to stop their own death. And that's
Mhm.
where, and then because it was a horror movie, it typically means it's a teen slasher. So that's where I took off from. So,
And
but
what was like how close to the script is the final movie? Like, were there any big changes?
there are a bunch of little changes. Um, the biggest change was tone, in the sense that, you know, I write with a lot of, humor anyway, but it was a much darker, blacker movie, in the sense that, when she started to realize she was dying each time and that she was getting weaker, there was a scene where Lori was banging on the door to get in to go to the bathroom in the dorm. And inside, Tree was actually taping her collarbone in place and resetting her ribs, you know, that had been
Mm,
broken. And so it was more like it's a little more David Cronenberg, body horror as well.
mhm,
And when you see the movie, as you know, that was reduced to a and then a, "Oh, you're going to die," and that
mm.
was it. So tonally, there was stuff like that. There's the part of Gregory where it was actually, I'm sorry, Carter was actually two people. They were a guy who she had slept with, and he like kind of had a crush on her. He thought, and he was like this kind of more of a James Dean tough guy, and the fact that she didn't remember him hurt his feelings. And like at one point when he first meets him, he's like, "Hey, remember me?" And she's like, "No." He goes, "I saw you naked. We slept together." And
Mm.
she's like, "Yeah, that doesn't really narrow it down. Sorry." And later on, when she starts to die, each day this Carter comes by and drops a tray on her with chocolate milk. And all of a sudden she's like, that doesn't just happen. He's doing that on purpose. Like, no matter what I say, he's always stumbling over me. And she realizes that, oh, this is him trying to meet her.
Mm,
So she knows he's a geek. So at one point she goes to him and says, in fact, in the one of the earlier drafts, he says, "Oh yeah, it's a classic time loop. I need you to watch the Bank episode of X-Files and also read Days of Future Past from the X-Men. So he was just like this total geek. And then when the director rewrote it, for better or for worse, directors make decisions, and he decided to merge the two, and it was fine. And then, but it was still essentially the same story. It was, there's still that scene where, in this case, it wasn't Carter, it was the other guy who died in the watchtower trying to save her, and that's when she realized, oh my God, if I manage to stop my death now, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and he's going to be dead. Like that's
Mm.
terrible. So that's when she goes up to the watchtower and kills herself. And it was funny because there's a line where the killer reaches to the top of the watchtower, and she says, he gets there and she has a noose, the bell around her neck, the rope for the bell, and she says, "I'll see you tomorrow, asshole." And then when they shot it, because a writer's not on the set, so writers can't, you don't know what's going on until you see a rough cut. But I was in a screening audience, and the killer gets to the top, and she's there with a rope around her neck, and she's like, "You can kill me, and you can kill my friends, but there's no way I'm ever going to stop until I come back, and I'm able to kill," or something like that. And I'm like, okay, that's a choice. And then after the movie was over, they did a screening, survey.
Mm.
And this 15-year-old boy, they go, "Was there anything you would do differently?" And this 15-year-old boy raises his hand and he goes, "Why is she doing Shakespeare before she kills herself?" And they're like, "Oh." And so they changed it back to "See you tomorrow, asshole." So it's so little things like that, there's also a nurse, a school nurse, who was helping her figure out what was going on and monitoring her subsequent deaths. And the director was like, "You know what? Let's take Gregory, the one she's having an affair with, and make him a doctor in the hospital." And he looked at the x-rays and he tells her this. So now we don't need that woman. And it's like, that's fine. I mean, the woman was in I don't know, 5 scenes because the day kept playing over. But significant wise, in the original draft, she was estranged from her mother because her father had died. And in this draft, she was estranged from her her father because her mother died. But essentially, it was, the entire, we call it 35,000 feet, like if you're looking at it, you go, oh yeah, I mean, it's the same movie. It's just, things are going to happen. Like, for example, there is a jock character that she was sure it was him because he was a little misogynistic. And she eventually found out that he was in the bookstore where she worked every day, not because she was stalking him. He was stalking her because of her paranoia, but rather he was trying to find this play because he was trying to go to try out for the play, but he was mortified because he was a jock. And that character became the gay character in the movie,
Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, Tim. And so, interesting to me, Peter, when your name goes on a movie, there are things that you can't control, you know. Like her saying to him, "It's not like you have a foot long," ha ha ha. Like, to me, I don't go for humor that degrades people's physicalness, And so for a joke like that, that's not a joke that I would have written in 100 years. But apparently on the set that day, the actress asked the director, "Hey, can I say this?" He goes, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. Say it. We'll see what happens." And it made it into the movie. One day after I was after I was on Facebook, And this woman sat down, she goes, "Did you have a happy death day?" And I said, "Yes." And she goes, "Can I ask you a question?" And I instinctively knew what it was. I said, "Listen, I have to say, I get a sense of what you're going to say, and I have to apologize, but I really had nothing to do with it." And what it was is she was deaf and she was upset that the scene where, I want to say Rachel, but that's her actress name,
Oh yeah.
Danielle.
Mm.
Yeah, it was like, "Why are you, do you hear me what I'm saying?" And it was like, like I worked with deaf people like all through college and maybe 4 years after that, where I would work at a summer camp. And that's something I would never, you don't make fun of people's disabilities. And for her to do it and get a big laugh from the audience, I was like, oh my God, that's so mortifying. But again, once your name is on it, it's on it, and you have to,
Mm.
yeah. So, but then she's like, "Thank you for that. Thank you for explaining." I said, "Well, I'm sorry for all the other people that saw it and, felt I
Mm.
was trying to get a cheap laugh off of them." So, but,
And then also, there is the original ending that they have on the Blu-ray,
uh-huh,
where the um, Gregory's wife comes in at into the hospital room and
uh-huh.
kills her, and then it cuts to credits. Was that was that
That
from the
was in
original
the
script as well?
original. That was in the original. But if you look at it, there's all this humor that's in the movie. And when you
Mm.
look at that scene, it is devoid of any humor at all.
Yeah.
And to me, when I wrote it, it was supposed to be like, okay, here we go again.
Mm.
She's going to get killed for another reason, or it's the next day, or it's whatever. And there was supposed to be that, you know, comedic relief, like, really all that, and now you're going to kill me. Hello, I'm
Mm.
finally made it to the next day. But if you look at it, there's zero humor in there. And it was very clear to me, and the director and I never talked about, but it's very clear that the director didn't like that ending. So
Mm.
he gave it the most depressing, you know, given up hope moment of the movie. And when I watched it, I laughed to myself because I'm like, well, they're going to reshoot that. There's no way that's going to be the ending. Um,
Mm.
but if you look at it from the tone in which it was supposed to be delivered, it would have been a fun, the audience would have been, what? Oh, got to see the sequel, but instead it was like, oh, all that, and she's dead. Oh, wow. Goodbye. So, you know, but I don't know. What do you think? You saw it. What did you think?
Yeah, I think that I could see that the director could have like sabotaged it, but as a deleted scene, I did get that. Whenever it happens, I kind of I got the laugh whenever it cut to credits. It got me, but but I think that was kind of coming in from like knowing the story behind it. I think if it was just in the movie that way, then yeah, it wouldn't have hit the same way because like you said, there's not really a lighthearted tone in that scene, and
Hmm.
it does feel a bit more bleak rather than comedic.
Hmm. Yeah. So, but for yeah, I mean, here's the thing: is when you write it, like I've written movies. I wrote Man of the House as an example that I use, the one with Tommy Lee Jones. It's like you raise your kid and you teach them not to drink and not to swear in public and not to um, have sex before they're married or whatever it is. Whatever you want to teach your kid, you teach your kid. And then they go off to college and, they do all the things that you were hoping they wouldn't do. And at the end of the day, they're still your kid. And when you
Mm.
write a movie, there are always going to be changes, but at the end of the day, it's still your kid. Like there are things that are, there's nothing inherently different. I will tell you an interesting anecdote if you want to hear it, and you can edit it out if you don't find it interesting. Is when I sold the movie 10 years before it came out, uh, it was not at Blumhouse, but it was at a company called Rogue, and you know who Stanley is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Stan asked me once. He's like, "I don't know how you do it. How do you how do you deal with these notes? It drives me crazy. I'd never be able to write like that." And I said, Stan, the first draft is art, and every draft after that is commerce. So you write the draft that you want to write. At least that's the way that I work. Is I always write by spec, which means you write it and send it out, and someone will buy it or not buy it. But and when you send out that draft, that's your draft. That's the draft that you believe is whatever. And that's the draft they buy. And then they start making changes up the wazoo. But that's where the commerce comes in. They're paying you. It's officially their script now. You're just providing your services as a writer. So uh, they buy the script, and the producers and the development people sit down. A person sits down with me and says, "Listen, you got to show, don't tell. You got to show." She wakes up and, oh, she was drinking and she threw up on this one, and she slept with this guy, but did she really? Blah blah blah. And you got to show all that, Scott. Like that's what the movie's about. And I'm like, it's really not. I said the movie is about her reliving the day. That's the inciting, her murder is the inciting incident. And then what happens after that? She starts reliving the day that we saw. She's not reliving the night before the day that we saw. She's reliving that day. And they're like, no, 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 no. So you got to show all that. So I'm like, okay, what can I do? I got to show all that. So I write it so that her first waking up is on the 20-minute mark. And I turn it in, and they're like, "Oh, this is great. This is great. This is exactly what we need." And they said, "We're going to turn it into the head of the studio." And so we get a meeting set up, and the head of the studio gets on the phone and goes, "I don't know what the fuck I'm watching. I bought this fun, edgy, cool movie I'd never seen before, and now for the first 20 minutes, I'm watching Melrose Place. Like, what is this? This isn't, this isn't what I bought." And for the only time in my career, and I've even talked to other writers, they've never heard of this, but the head of development said, "I'm sorry, that was all on us. Scott said we were wrong, and Scott, I apologize. Go back to what it was and make the notes that you think we need based on, what we said afterwards. But that's on us. So we're sorry." And I've never, ever, ever heard that before or since. So, but it was, and the thing too is that when you look at the script, it's very House of Cards. Like, you can't just, in any other movie, there would be like, if they had taken out the police car scene and said, "Yeah, that doesn't work, take that out," then everybody would say, "How come she didn't just leave the campus? I don't get it. She should have just left." You know. So they would try to take out a scene, but then it was like a house of cards. It just rippled through the whole movie, and then they'd be like, "Oh, okay, no, we can't do that." So in a way, there was a lot. I mean, Christopher was clever in the sense that he took the what do you call it, the nurse, and made her the doctor.
Yeah.
Which was funny because if you look, the doctor is a teacher. In the classroom, he's teaching physics. Uh, Later on, he's some kind of advisor to whatever. But then he becomes a medical doctor, and you're like, who is this guy? Like, what is it? Are they at this teaching hospital that teaches physics? And so was like, and I'll tell you something that no one knows because I never talk about it. But I'll tell you if you ask. But if you don't ask, then I'll tell you at the end. Is that fair?
Uh, Yeah, that's
Okay.
fair. I, kind of going back to the movie structure as a whole. I know, like as a writer, I'm guessing that you have an idea of, or who is behind the mask in every loop, and in the movie, I think it's at least especially the first time you watch it, it is ambiguous, by necessity because it is a mystery as well. And I'm curious because at first I thought that, maybe sometimes it's Toombs and sometimes it's Lori, but I think I'm fairly confident now that it is Lori in every loop except for the one where Toombs removes his mask, and then the one following that, I think Toombs never even puts on the mask, and I was wondering like if whenever she goes to the hospital and then she finds Toombs and then he
Okay.
or I think it's the one afterwards where she discovers that Toombs exists as a serial killer and is in the hospital, and then she goes and, he's wearing the mask and then he takes off the mask and they have the confrontation.
Hmm.
Um, I as a viewer, I feel like that's the only one where it's actually the red herring serial killer behind the mask.
Hmm.
And in every other one, it was Lori, and I was wondering if that kind of falls in line with what your intentions were, or if you thought maybe it was more ambiguous, or maybe sometimes it was
No, I
the
think
serial killer.
yeah, I think the only difference is that when Lori did put the mask on him in an effort to be a decoy. So whatever was going on the other side of campus was, like Toombs. If let's say this, if Tree did not go to the hospital, she would never met Toombs because Toombs would have,
Mhm.
ran off campus. He was very specific about, you see the people that he killed in that newscast. So he would have left. He probably would have taken off the baby mask and been like, "What the fuck? Why is this baby mask on me?" Um, and he would have left. And so, really, the only person that was ever, uh, when Toombs came out, actually, Toombs didn't even came out. Tree went in and was like, "I know you're
Mhm.
awake. Wake, open your eyes, you son of a bitch." So part of Laurie's plan was always to frame Toombs, and she took the advantage of the fact that, there's a serial killer on campus that day.
Mhm.
Um, but so no, I don't believe anybody was ever, I don't believe we saw any, it was never, I don't think it was anybody's intent to give the impression that there were two killers. I think there was a killer. Laurie was the one who had, you know, I mean, and Laurie wouldn't have even came up with the plan if not for the fact that uh, Tree kept not eating that cupcake. So
Yeah. And you mentioned that you had a plan for a trilogy, and
mhm.
what was your concept for your version of the sequel and then the potential third movie?
My plan for the sequel was that she was going to be going through she was going to be reliving another day, maybe a year from then her birthday or something, and she started to realize that there was one other person on campus, this guy who was never, everybody else was, the guy with the sunglasses, the will you sign this, the roommate bursting in, like all that stuff was always the same in every scene. But she started to realize that there was this one guy who would be like, getting off of a bus, frustrated, like he didn't have any change. And she'd notice him later on. And all of a sudden she's like, "What the heck?" And she goes to him and she goes, "Listen, this is going to be crazy, but I've been reliving the same day over and over and over." And he's like, "Son of a bitch, I've been reliving the same day over and over and over." And so they having to team up to figure out what's going on. And in the process, they fall in love. And then their being in love makes them go, you know what? Is this the worst thing in the world to be reliving our lives together? And something happens. And at one point, he says, listen, I know who the killer is. Meet me in the locker room underneath the gym. And she goes down there, and she's like looking around for him. And all of a sudden, the gate closes. And he's like, listen, you know, only one of us is going to go on to the next day. And, it has to be you. And so you're here where you're safe, and I'm going to go get killed. And then the next day will be over again. She's like, no, don't. So it's like Happy Death Day is this tragic love story, you know?
Mm.
So I thought that would be cool because we had never seen up until that point. I mean, I never saw was it Palm Springs?
Yeah, there's
But
Palm Springs, and I
yeah.
think I believe that I haven't seen it, but Map of Tiny Perfect Things that also involves two people that are stuck in the same time loop.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. Um, and then the third one was going to be a little more Final Destination in the sense that she had gone on together and people loved her and she was happy and turns out she was smart when she focused, and so she was valedictorian at the college graduation, and as she's
Mhm.
speaking, bus loses control and smashes and kills like 30 students, and she's devastated, and she looks and she realizes that the only way that she can save all these people is to sacrifice herself to relive another day so she can figure out what went wrong. And as she starts to investigate, she realizes that, that bus happened for a reason. She was going to finally look outside of her. By the trilogy, she had grown enough as a person that she was willing to sacrifice her life for a bunch of strangers. And when you
Mm.
compare that to the tree that we meet originally, it would make her this whole person. And each
Yeah.
time, like the first time she relived it for herself, the second time she relived it and won, but at a serious cost because he was never there after that. And then the third one was that this girl that was the most self absorbed girl on the planet is suddenly dying to solve this murder, if you will. So,
Mhm. Yeah, that's
but
interesting.
yeah.
And then I know that they went on to do the sequel, and the director has the writing credit himself. Have you seen the sequel?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I saw it before it came out. I actually thought it was gonna be better received than it was, but I mean, it was. I think I was just trying to put the most positive spin on it. But I just, it's interesting to me because, in the first 5 minutes, she's like, "Oh, I went through all that for nothing. Oh, I didn't learn anything. I mean, I didn't do anything to stop this killer." And it's like, yeah, you did. And now you're reliving a different day. And, the director would say things like, well, she has an arc in this one. And it's like, okay, you know, I mean, the movie. Well, I was going to say, did you see Megan?
Yeah.
Okay. Megan, cute little movie, went on to make a shit ton of money, but it was a horror movie. And then the second one, they did exactly what they did with Happy Death Day, which was to take a horror franchise and turn it into a science fiction franchise. And then they lost so much money. And then they're like, hey, let's take this Megan, which made so much money as a horror franchise, and we'll turn it into a science fiction franchise. And they lost even more money. It was the same company. And it's like, you know, imagine if you watched Lethal Weapon with Mel Gibson and Danny Glover, and then Lethal Weapon 2 was a period musical, with the same
Mhm.
characters. You'd be like, what? Well, that's not what I can. That's not what I paid to see. And I just think that, like, I don't know. I don't know what possessed them to do Happy Death Day as a, you know, science fiction, weird science knockoff instead of you know. And then they said, well, we don't want to just do the same thing again. It's like, well, you kind of did. You kind of just, kept
Yeah, and
reliving the
there's
day.
a yeah, there's a lot of mirrors to the first movie, and in terms of especially like some of her deaths and even some of the shots, which
Mhm.
as
And the
which I
montage.
yeah,
Yeah.
which I do kind of like as a meta narrative, but I can understand why it's maybe not the best creative decision.
hmm and also, like, I'm sorry, the kid who played the roommate, great
Ryan.
kid, but, like Ryan, yeah. But to open up with him picking his nose, it was like, really? Like that's your like, I mean, it had nothing to do with him. I'm sure they told him to do it, but it's like, talk about setting the bar low. That's like low enough to trip over, and so.
Mhm.
But what can you do?
And yeah, and kind of jumping back on a different direction because I did write a superhero movie blog for many years, and
hmm
I noticed one other project that you were involved with, and you talked about Stan Lee earlier was Stanley's Mosaic. So just kind of briefly, I was wondering how that project came about. Like, how did you get involved in that?
Stan and I were friends, and he had we actually worked on a few projects. That was the one that actually got made. We worked on one that was the president of the United States as a superhero. Uh, we worked on two animated Ringo musicals, Ringo Starr. And if you think, sitting down with Stan is fun, imagine sitting down with Stan and Ringo Starr. It was like, it was so cool. Um, but yeah, Stan and I just became friends through the comic books. And then, when I left the X-Men, I started doing movie stuff. I was bi-coastal for years. So anytime I'd head out, sometimes I'd use his office space. And, so then eventually, as projects would come up, he'd be like, what about this? And what about that? You know, and it's funny, one time I was in Beverly Hills. I was, just drove off the main drag because there's all these lights, and one street over there are stop signs. So I'm like, I don't want to bother with the street lights and both. So I pulled over to a much slower street, and I was driving a red convertible, which my assistant booked. I would not book it, and I only bring it up because it's pertinent to the story. And I came to a stop sign, and the door flies open. I'm like, oh my God, am I being hijacked or whatever, carjacked? So the side door opens up, and it's Stan, and he goes, lobby. He's standing in front of this cigar store, and he goes, lobby. He goes, they scheduled me an hour early for my meeting. Do me a favor, drive me around, will you? And by then he's already in the car, the door's closed. So I'm like, sure, Stan, let's drive around. So I mean, I didn't. What do you have? Whoever has anything better to do than to drive around with Stan Lee? So I was like, oh yeah, this
Absolutely.
is so much fun. But and then at the end of the hour, he goes, okay, this is great. Drop me off here. You're the best. But he used to call me Lobby for short. That was his name for me. So I got carjacked by Stanley. How cool is that?
That's great. And then, I think that's about all I have. I guess jumping back to that thing that you mentioned earlier that you were going to tell me about at the end. Let's circle back around to
Okay,
that.
you know what happened in the sequel with that we'll use the term dumbass. We'll use that dumbass machine that, uh,
Mhm.
Sissy or whatever it was. Um Chris and I
The Sisyphus.
yeah. Chris and I before we just before the first movie came out, he's like, "Oh, I have an idea for the second one based on what we see in the first one." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I'm thinking, I wonder if he figured it out on his own. That's impressive. But he didn't, and he went on and did that version. But if you look at it, and it goes back to what I was saying before about Gregory, about how he's the strangest college professor, doctor, teaching advisor person I've ever seen. But what happened is if you go back and look at the first scene that he's in, he is explaining this time travel based on Tree getting killed and how,
Mm.
she keeps going back to the beginning. He calls it quantum hysterics. And he's actually writing it out on the board and he's explaining it. And that was the reason why. So everybody, all the producers, everybody that kept saying to me, you can't, you have to explain it, you have to explain it. Because that's what they kept saying. I kept saying, you know, uh, Groundhog's Day is never explained.
Mm.
Bill Murray figures it out only after he's gone through this whole thing, and it's really about being a better person. And he even tries to be a better person, and it doesn't work until he's actually has changed. And Andy McDowell falls in love with him, and he wakes up the next day. So to me, every time they said you need to explain why, and I said, No, you don't. That's not what the movie's about. The movie's about her journey, and she solved the crime, and that's enough for the audience to go, oh, okay, she saved herself, she saved her life, the final girl
Mm.
saved herself. So um but my own personal joke was that I had written it into the movie even in the first draft, even before anybody ever read it. And then when it made it into the movie, I was like, son of a bitch, it's right there, it's right there on the board, it's right there in that scene. And and so that was that. um And I will tell you one other thing. I was dating a girl. Yeah, I'll tell you, not to make fun of her, but it is kind of funny. We laugh about it. Um, I was dating Teresa Gelman when I wrote the movie,
Mm.
and I used to call her Tree for short. And I often put real people's names into movie. Like Toombs was an old high school gym teacher, and I just love the name Toombs. It's like, oh, that's such a great name
Mhm.
for a killer. Um, The cop's name, you can see it, is Santora. That's my uh, sister-in-law's maiden name. So there's all these things that are in the movie, and but Tree Gelbman, I wrote her into it, and we were both like, okay, well, that's never gonna fly. Like, the tree part is okay, but Gelbman is just not a sound you expect to hear in a movie.
Mm.
You know, even Laurie was Laurie Spangler, and Spangler was named after the Harold Ramis Ghostbuster.
Yeah.
But Geltman, I'm like, there's just something, about that sound. And then when I saw the screening and I thought for sure they're going to change it, and they never did. So, and I have this property now called Ball and Chain, which is at Sony, and the character is about a couple that's about to get divorced and then get superpowers that only work when they're together. So they have to stay together for the sake of the earth. And it's based on a comic book I created where it's Edgar and Mallory Bolson. And it's funny to me because over the years, people have tried to change their last names. And I'm always like, Bolson is, I mean, it sounds like Molson, it sounds like a beer, it sounds like like a, like a solid name. Um, but people are always trying to change it. And yet Gelman made it all the way through right up, like right onto the screen.
Mm.
And like with many people that I name characters after, a famous character in X-Men called Executioner. And I named him after my college psychology professor. And he was very flattered. But now, every year, now he's the dean of the college. And every year people come up to him and they go, hey, did you? He goes, yes, yes, I know. And what happens is that if you Google his name at the very beginning of Google and Yahoo and Jeeves and all that other stuff, his, a picture of him would show up and it'd be like, oh, he's the dean. But now he's like, on page 8 of Google. And it's the same way with Teresa. Like, Teresa has a great job, but her name, there's no pictures of her until like way into the internet. So it's kind of funny. So,
Mm.
but she's always very flattered when people go, "Hey, are you?" And she's like, "Yeah, that's me." So, but,
All right, well, thank you so much for talking with me. It was, a great pleasure. Do you
thank
have
you.
any other upcoming or recent projects that
Yeah,
you'd
I
like to
have
tell
a
people about?
yeah. There's a movie right now. Just finishing the script. I wrote it with my partner, who we've written a few things together, but we wrote Man the House together years ago. But it's a thriller about a German Shepherd whose owner is brutally murdered, and then the dog tracks down the 5 people that killed his owner and kills them all individually. So it's called Unleashed, but the internet calls it John Lick. So, but so that is, I'm just finishing the final redraft of that. We have a director. We'll start casting soon, and you know. Oh, and I also have one other movie being done right now called Population Zero, and it's a Western, Old West kind of horror thriller, and it's about a guy who comes into town and he gets accused of murder and he gets hung, and he doesn't die. They're about to bury him, and all of a sudden he's like, "Whoa!" and he pops up, and he seeks his revenge on the town because it turns out they killed him because they're burying this mystery. And so he winds up tracking down each person in town and killing them. So the last thing he does when he leaves town is he takes his paint and he paints a big zero over the population sign. And to me, it's the first time anybody's ever killed anytime a slasher's ever killed an entire town. So I think that's kind of fun. So
Mhm.
can you think of a
I,
timer?
um,
All right.
no, I mean, I think there's movies where the entire cast dies, but it's not. Well, 30 Days a Night. I think that's kind of the closest one.
Uh,
Uh, Barrow, Alaska. That the vampires uh, in Alaska. I think basically the entire town, except for like the couple main characters, die.
yeah. Um, all right, cool. Yeah, I wonder when they're going to bring that back. Somebody's got to bring it back. But all righty. Well, it was a pleasure.
Absolutely. And for the listeners, thank you for listening. And I've been Bubbawheat, and until next time.